How do you attack the Washington receivers after the Jahan Dotson trade? Which Bills wideout is going to step forward in the wake of Curtis Samuel's turf toe? And who will be the 2024 HSFF hype guy? Plus, 9-time FFPC league champion Brian Domville joins the show to talk about Bengals backs, Patriots pass catchers, and much more. We've got a great show for you live from the 2024 Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship at Caesars, Southern Indiana. Brian Domville is here. I'm Eric Balkman. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts now.
The pressure, I've seen greater men than neither lesser.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now watching the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and Farrell Elliott.
Solace in the scripture, are we not all our father's sons? I became a man, nobody ever told me what a man was.
Thank you, Rob. Greetings and salutations to all you Balkaholics and Ferrelliacs tuning in to the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship over at myffpc.com. Hi, hello, and welcome. I'm Eric Balkman. You know me from the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the FFPC, and this show, as well as the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Connect with me on the X at Eric Balkman. We have a great show tonight, and I'll bring in my co-host right away. Actually, before I bring in my co-host, I'll give you this reminder. If you want to connect with us on X, you can do so at HSFF Brian Domville, who is tonight's co-host, I'll bring him in. He's at Brian_Domville on the X as well. Check out Farrell's Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship at KFFSC.com. Listen, if you don't have you're not going to make it to Louisville this weekend, it's fine because everything's filled up for the live events, but there's plenty of online stuff over at KFFSC.com. Check that out. Facebook.com/HSFF is where to reach us. And of course, highstakesfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you have any questions or comments, or you want to weigh in on who the hype guy is going to be, we'll try to get to all the chat room questions, the X posts and emails throughout the show tonight. I'm flying solo, no producer, no audio engineer. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this works out tonight on this on the internet connection that we have here. Fantasy Pros Championship drafts continue to pop off. As a reminder, at some point this week, we are going to be closing the 6-hour slow drafts for the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC main event, and our best ball tournaments. Basically, all 6-hour slow drafts will be shut down at some point this week. So if you want to get in the slow draft, now's your last chance. Fantasy Pros Championship, we have drafts popping off tonight at 11 o'clock, midnight, and 1 a.m. So you have plenty of chances to take your shot at $1 million grand prize in a $6 million prize pool. Same thing with the FFPC main event. 2 contests with 2 separate $1 million grand prizes. We're going to make 2 millionaires this year, and those have live drafts, slow drafts via the 2-hour variety too. Will continue in all our formats, including the main event and the Fantasy Pros Championship coming up over the course of next week as well. Check out the Empire Dynasty Leagues and Dynasty Leagues we have over at myffpc.com. Let's bring in tonight's guest co-host tonight. He's already won 9 FFPC league titles under his belt. He's looking for much more this year as he chases $1 million grand prize in the Fantasy Pros Championship. He's a guy that drafted at the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship Cincinnati edition the weekend before, and he'll be able to spill all his knowledge that he learned from drafting in that tonight. You follow him on the X at Brian_Domville. It's Brian Domville. Brian, welcome in. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this Friday night.
Thanks, Balky. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun show. And anytime we get to announce the hype guy, which we'll do so at the end of the show tonight, it's always going to be fun. Dom Gazzetti already pumping in. I had a conversation with him before we went on tonight. We have the OnlyFans setting in the hotel room tonight. So and the lighting too is very. This is going to be the sexiest edition of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour tonight. Yeah, and yes, Kevin Williamson, who I'll see tomorrow, I'm assuming here, the Bourbon City baller himself. The beard remains. Let's get to know you, Brian, before we get into the fantasy football aspect of it. Can you tell us how you're spending your time, what you're doing for a living when you're not winning all these FFPC titles?
Sure. I'm a CPA. I work for a company called App Properties, a brokerage firm over here in Chicago. So you might know it from your neck of the woods up in Wisconsin up there too.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm an accountant. So, I like numbers and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of a natural fit with the fantasy football. So yeah, we live in the western suburbs with my wife. I got 2 daughters, 5 and 2, almost 2. So keeps me busy. So I'm still trying to do some drafts here when I can. So.
That's awesome and great to hear. There's a long storied history of CPAs coming on this show, and they all are pretty successful fantasy football players to the surprise of no one. Let's get into this tonight. A huge drafting weekend in the FFPC. Obviously, I'm going to be drafting live at the KFFSC this weekend. I look at a lot of different storylines that we'll be breaking down tonight. I'll lead things off with the Bengals situation, right? Chase Brown and Zach Moss in a backfield that featured Zach Moss being drafted first. I would say throughout the course of the majority drafting season, and I would say about a month or so ago, Chase Brown kind of overtook him, and he's still ahead of him in ADP right now. Do you have a feeling on which way you'd be going in the majority of your drafts when you decide to go with the Bengals running back? Is it usually Chase Brown or is it usually Zach Moss?
Yeah, it's actually a good question to start with since I'm actually a Bengals fan. So this is something that I've kind of been paying attention to all offseason. I'm definitely on the Chase Brown side of things. I think he's more explosive and he'll probably be used out of the backfield, catching passes. I think the offense is really going to run through Burrow in the passing game. And I think Brown just kind of fits what they want to do. At the same time, I think Moss will still have value. He's still going to have a good role here because I don't think Brown's like a feature guy that they're going to ride, all season long. So I'm open to taking both, but I definitely like Chase Brown a little bit more, and I'm targeting him in drafts for sure.
Is it just the youth aspect with Chase Brown, or what is it that's more attractive to you about Brown rather than Moss?
Yeah, I mean, that's really it. That's kind of the way I draft. I'm more aggressive, and like I said, I think Moss is fine. We kind of know what he is at this point. He's been a solid number 2 back for most of his career. He did a nice job in Indy last year when Taylor went down, and I think he can still produce, if called upon. But I feel like, being a fan too of the Bengals, from what I hear, they love Brown and they really want to make him a pretty big part of the offense this year, and that's one of the reasons why they were comfortable getting rid of Mixon and signing Moss on a cheap contract. So.
When you talk about, and let's keep the conversation with running backs going, DeAndre Swift in Chicago. Now, you're a Bengals fan, as you said, but I know you follow the Bears. Can you let us into what we should be expecting from DeAndre Swift as fantasy owners this year?
Yeah, I do like Swift. I'm actually a Georgia grad too, so I've been following Swift for a long time. I've been a big fan of his since he came in the league, and kind of saw what can happen with him in Philly last year when he stays healthy and gets the touches, and gets the ball in space and can make plays. So it seems to me like they weren't really happy with what they had. I've heard, I don't know, it seems like there's maybe Herbert's on the outs there. They have, Roschon Johnson, who they brought in last year. He seems like a solid guy, but I think Swift is the most talented guy there, and definitely the guy they're going to want to get the ball and the passing game too. Same, guy that's going to catch a lot of receptions. And given the contract they gave him, I think he looks like he's going to be the lead guy there.
Sorry, I think I faded in and out. Did you have me now, Brian? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay, cool. Running back situation. I just got done with the KFFSC auction before the show tonight. And I was kind of curious to see what happened with Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell. Neither one of them really separated too much. In the auction, they both went just for a couple of bucks each. Do you think there's value in drafting one of those guys this year? And if so, which is the guy that you'd be wanting to look at more than the other one?
Yeah, I think it's close. I'm leaning more Mason lately, but I have taken Mitchell as well. I think they're both worth, they're both going so late. It's worth taking a stab at either one, just because if McCaffrey does have injury issues like he had a couple years ago, I mean, somebody's going to come into obviously a great offense. My gut tells me that it'll be somewhat of a committee if McCaffrey goes out, but I would lean towards Mason. I think he's a little more talented, and Mitchell seems like he's had trouble staying on the field, but it sounds like, honestly, like all the guys there are already kind of banged up. But so it could be kind of a mess. But that one's always kind of tricky to figure out, that backfield after McCaffrey. But I think I would lean towards Mason. That's why.
So let's, because McCaffrey's already hurt, obviously, as you alluded to. And I wonder if it is a committee, if McCaffrey does not play, right? Is it enough of a non-committee, for lack of a better term, where Jordan Mason could start him that week, or would him and Mitchell and cannibalize each other, where neither one, I mean, they're both basically borderline flexes, because it'd be like 60-40 or 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. It sounds like they want Mason to kind of be the number 2 guy there. They're giving him every opportunity. So, it's kind of a guess, but I'd say maybe a 60-40 with him and Mitchell if McCaffrey went out. Where, again, they're going to be a run heavy team. We know they're one of the lowest pass volume teams in the league, so they're going to lean on the run no matter who's healthy. They always produce. It seems like they can pretty much throw any guy in there and he'll produce pretty good numbers. Yeah. So I mean, I think Mason could step into a nice role there if McCaffrey went down.
Sticking in the same division, Brian, and we'll get into Cooper Kupp later on in the show, but right. I think that this has been kind of fascinating. When we opened up drafts in the FFPC in January, Puka Nacua was like a slam dunk first-round pick. I mean, he was going at the back end of the first round in just about every draft. And then even before he got – well, I shouldn't say before he got hurt, but he got hurt and he slipped a little bit. And there were still whispers, not even whispers, but like beat reporters saying that, Cooper Kupp looks all the way back. He looks as good as he's ever has. Sean McVay saying that I think it was Sean McVay. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on this. I think it was Sean McVay or one of the coaches saying that they want to run the offense, through Cooper Kupp, and it looks like that's how the offense is going to be run, through Kupp. So considering all this, now we look at the Nacua injury and the sort of reemergence of Cooper Kupp. They're basically only separated by 8 picks in ADP in the Fantasy Pros Championship, which shout out to FantasyMojo.com. Darren Armani, who's here in Kentucky. I talked with him earlier tonight, a couple hours ago. He's going to be drafting this weekend. He's also the man to check with everything, stack finding, waiver wire bids, ADP with the FFPC over at FantasyMojo.com. Make sure you get a subscription to that. If you are playing in the FFPC, it is invaluable. So according to him, 204 and 212 right now. 8 picks separate these two guys. I'm starting to come around to Cooper Kupp. How have you been treating this situation? How would you be treating it if you're drafting this weekend, if you're drafting a Rams receiver? It's going to be tough to get both of these guys. Do you like one better than the other at this point?
I would say, I've been more on Kupp. It seems like the ADPs are really starting to consolidate a little bit. Actually, the first FFPC draft I did this year was a slow draft, and I got the 12th pick, and I took Nacua on the turn before his injury. So I am high on him this year. It sounds like it's not a very serious, injury where they're expecting him back week 1. I like both, honestly, and that may be the easy way out, but I think that's going to be a really consolidated passing game running through both those guys. But to your point, I have heard the same thing about, Cooper Kupp. They're going to run the offense through him again. It sounds like he was really hurt last year and just never was right. And I was targeting him when he was more of a 3rd round ADP. Yeah, I took him a few times and I really like that. I'm still on him, at the 212. I would still take him at that spot. Absolutely. I think the Rams offense consistently produces, league winning type players. You saw what happened with Kyron last year and Puka, and obviously they were guys that you got super late in the draft, but even early in the draft, I think that's one of the best offenses you can be, invest in fantasy with Sean McVay there. And it's highly concentrated as well. So again, it might be the easy way out, but I like both.
So even with Nacua going ahead of Kupp, you would still be willing to take him at the 204 right now? I
think so. Yeah. And then if you're doing, I do enough drafts where I feel like I want exposure to both. Right. If you told me like I only had one league and, I would probably take Cooper Kupp heads up over Puka Nacua. I think he'll have a better year.
I want to go back to the Niners here because until this Brandon Aiyuk situation gets resolved, we're still going to keep talking about it. Late last night, there was news, and I don't know who reported it, saying that all of a sudden the Commanders were back in the running to acquire Aiyuk. in this auction tonight, I thought I might get a deal on him, and I don't know why I thought that because I keep waiting for him to fall in drafts, and it just hasn't happened this year. It just has not happened. I feel like he should be going later than he actually is because of everything that's going on, because of all this training camp that he's missing, and he's not. And once again, nobody got a deal on him tonight. I feel like he went around right where he should, for how much he should have gone. And I would expect that this weekend, as the drafts continue here, he's probably going to be going at the same spot. So I think anybody who's looking for a deal on Aiyuk, you're just not going to find it. What's the best piece of advice you can give FFPC players on how to handle Brandon Aiyuk right now, knowing that, you're kind of still paying sticker price for him?
Yeah. I mean, he went in, I actually got him in one Kentucky draft last week. He went like early 4th in both of the leagues I live drafted last week. So I still like him. I mean, it's a risk, but I think he's so talented. And, even if he, you look at the landing spots, Pittsburgh was a potential one. He'd automatically step in as the one there. I know Pickens is there, but there's really not much else. Mm-hmm. And I think, even with Terry McLaurin over there in Washington, even if, McLaurin was not part of the trade that would send Aiyuk to Washington as well, he would immediately slot in as the number one guy. I think he's one of the top receivers in the league. He doesn't get enough credit for being that elite, X outside receiver. So I think, late 3rd, even early 4th, I think he's worth the risk. I think he's too good. When you get to that point, past that mid 3rd into the early 4th, I'm still taking him at that spot.
Yeah, and I should bring this up too. Our good buddy Permar99 in the chat. Go Dogs for you, Brian. You are a Georgia fan, right?
I am. I'm a Georgia alum. So,
you're a Georgia alum. Oh my God, taking it a step further. Yeah.
So, yeah, I went to Georgia.
So. There you go. That's got to be fun too when you obviously the success that Georgia's had this last half decade or whatever, and then to see these guys go on into the pros and then drafting them too and watching them crush it for you on Sundays. What a time to be a Georgia fan or an alum in your case as well.
Yeah, it was a long wait. So we're finally enjoying, the finally the results we've been hoping for 20 years since I graduated from college. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
We might have a Georgia question or two, or at least a question or two on some Georgia players too coming up tonight as well. New England wide receivers. I normally I do this show and then I do the auction on Friday, but the auction was earlier and I'm doing the show, so I feel like because the auction's fresh in my mind, I keep coming back to it. Later on in the draft or in the auction, I was looking for just some upside at receiver. No New England receivers had been bought yet. I nominated Demario Douglas for $1. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know how I should be treating the Patriots receivers. I know I don't want Javon Baker. I mean, the reports on him have been not great, Bob, this weekend. So Douglas is interesting. Polk is interesting. Who's your favorite Patriots receiver to be drafting right now?
Yeah, it seems like Douglas goes first out of those guys, and he'd probably get my vote there. I just think they're all cheap, but he was there last year. It seems like they like him. He did pretty well given how horrible their offense was last year, and it's like it can't get any worse this year with the Patriots. So the old regime is gone. There's no more Matt Patricia offensive coordinator or anything crazy like that anymore. I've heard the same things about Baker. He seems like maybe a guy. Maybe you hear something positive midway through the year and you pick him up on waivers, and he's one of those guys that has like a run towards the end of the year. But yeah, and Polk too. It sounds like he's gonna get a lot of reps early on. So none of them really excite me that much. I'm kind of in agreement with you there. But if I had to pick one, I would say Douglas. He's probably the best shot for some value. He's a guy you can probably, when you get to bye weeks, you can put in there, and he's going to get some targets every week and get some receptions and give you a nice floor every week once you get to the injury and bye week time of the season. So
is that all we can expect from New England receivers this year? Just at bye week fill-ins at best?
That's the way I see it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and one of those guys takes over. I just don't see like the prototype alpha player, receiver coming out this year. It doesn't seem like it to me. Maybe when Drake May comes in, second half of the year, he has a good connection with one of those guys and just kind of feeds him targets. But yeah, I mean, I still think, especially with Douglas and Polk early on in the season, they're certainly worth drafting and stashing there for once you get to, the bye weeks, and maybe down the stretch, one of those guys, makes a run with, quarterback change.
We got a question from Trevor Holt, who's going to be drafting in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship this weekend. Carson Steele, the running back 2 in Kansas City. Now, anytime I hear the name Carson Steele, the first thing I automatically think of is we have been burned and hurt by Clyde Edwards-Helaire so much. We are looking for any reason to draft any other Chiefs backup running back, right? And I think that's a huge part of it. Now, he's been very good in the preseason, but from what I've been seeing, it's not usually been with the 1s or even the 2s. It's been a lot with the 3s, some with the 2s. But I think that if I had to draft a Chiefs backup running back, and I considered this in the auction, it was still going to be Edwards-Helaire over Steele. And I would probably take Steele over Deneric Prince at this point. But I think it's still CEH for me. What do you think about Carson Steele? How likely is it that he'd end up on any of your teams going forward in these last 2 weeks before the season starts, Brian?
Yeah, I haven't drafted him yet, and I am pretty heavily invested in Pacheco. So I have drafted more of Prince early on in the draft season. I have not drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like, to your point, I just feel like if something were to happen to Pacheco, he's not going to get, they've tried it with him before. It just has never worked. There's enough other talent with Prince and Steele. And to your question on Steele, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've seen him start to go towards the end of drafts that I've been in, and he looks good. He's kind of one of those talented guys. And Pacheco came in there as a 7th rounder and unseeded Edwards-Helaire. So even though Steele's an undrafted free agent, if he looks good and he's athletic and physical, and why not? I mean, Edwards-Helaire has kind of shown us he's kind of just a guy at this point. So I would probably take, honestly, Edwards-Helaire last of the 3 at this point for me. Maybe I've just gotten burned too many times,
right?
But yeah, he'd probably be at the bottom for me right now.
You have CEH PTSD essentially is what it is. Be a good team name this year too.
Yeah.
I totally get it too. I mean, we're obviously hunting for upside, and I know we want to draft the backup, but at the same time, we have seen what Edwards-Helaire can do for us, and it hasn't been a ton. What we haven't seen is Carson Steele, and what we haven't seen is him out on the field in a real live NFL game. So we don't know how he would do. He could be great. He could be very, very good. We know what Edwards-Helaire is. We don't know what Steele is, and I think that's what's intriguing about taking Steele here as well. Moving on here, contractually obligated. I always make this joke. We're FFPC podcast, FFPC's tight end premium, and I have to ask you about Kyle Pitts. We have to talk about Kyle Pitts. He is the most polarizing guy year in and year out, every year in the NFL. Is this going to be his year where he achieves greatness, where he captures all the accolades, the stats, everything that the Kyle Pitts truthers have been expecting since he came into the league from Florida? Is this going to be the year? No Arthur Smith, brand new offensive coordinator, and not 1, but 2, it appears, real quarterbacks in Atlanta to get him the ball. How do you feel about Kyle Pitts? How have you been drafting him this year?
Yes, I believe this is finally the year. I am definitely targeting him. When the price is right, for sure. He definitely isn't right towards the top of the tight ends for me. To your point, Arthur Smith is gone. I don't know. And again, I'm an Atlanta native, so I do watch some Falcons football. And like the last couple of years, like, I don't know if people may know, but Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota were just absolutely awful. Yes. I mean, they were awful. I mean, below replacement level. I mean, and now you put in Cousins, and yeah, he's coming off an Achilles. But to your point, they drafted Penix, who I think is a talented passer. I watched him play a good bit in college last year, and he can throw the ball. And so I think if you needed him to step in and just get the ball to Pitts, get it to London, get it to Bijan, he can do that. So I think this is finally the year. So I think it's a good year to be aggressively drafting Pitts.
Yeah, and I was aggressive in bidding on him tonight. I ultimately lost out on him, and I was fine with it. I ended up getting Trey McBride instead, so I'm cool with it. But yeah, I think I'm probably going to be drafting him a couple of times this weekend for sure. The Bourbon City baller, Kevin Williamson, after the first 6 quarterbacks are gone, he's in the YouTube chat right now. Who would you take between Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott? That's the order according to Fantasy Pros ADP after the top 6. Murray, Love, Burrow, Prescott. I have my order, but Brian, I'm going to ask you yours first.
Sure. I would probably go right now. I would say Love would be first. I really like the passing. He's got so many weapons. Like even if a guy goes down, it's like they're 4 deep at 4, maybe 5 deep with Bo Melton at receiver. They're 2 deep at tight end. I think looks like they're gonna open that offense up like they did the second half of last year. So I put him first. I'd probably go Murray second just because of the rushing ability. I like, obviously Marvin Harrison's there now. He's got Trey McBride, Michael Wilson, and Greg Dortch seem like they're good secondary players. So there's a decently deep receiving core there, plus the rushing upside.
Mm-hmm.
I like the coaching staff there. It seems like they have a good plan for what they want to do. They kind of overachieved last year. And I would probably put my Bengal Joe Burrow next. A little worried with all the the receivers upset about their contracts, but he's got two really good ones with Chase and Higgins. I think there is some downside there if things were to get ugly with the receivers, but I think he's back healthy. He's had a full off season. He's really good when he's healthy. If you look at the games he's played healthy, he's one of the top guys in the league. So doesn't have the rushing upside of like a Murray, but I'd probably slot him in there next. And then probably last will be Dak. If CeeDee Lamb's out there, which I think we all expect him to be at some point, they're crazy if they don't get that contract done, then that's enough for him to put up a solid year with Ferguson and some of the others they have there. I just don't know if the upside is quite there with the lack of the running game and some of the other issues in Dallas right now. So that's probably my order right there. It's all fairly close, though, I think, in that range.
I agree with you that it's close, except for one player. Here's my 4. To me, it's Kyler Murray first, and then I'm going to take the other 3 as sort of like kind of a glut together. And the reason is, of these 4 guys, I think Kyler Murray has the biggest advantage in rushing, in getting outside the pocket, creating plays with his legs. And I think I don't know what it is. This year especially, I'm really targeting running quarterbacks because I just think it gives you more of an advantage to do it that way with a single quarterback start. So I would put Murray first. If this is weird, you're a Bengals guy, you put Love above Burrow. I'm a Packers guy. I think I'm going to put Burrow above Love, which is bizarre. Now, initially, I still kind of am worried about how things are going to go in Cincinnati this year with Chase still not there. He's holding in, right? He's at practice.
Yeah, he's kind of one of those hold-ins.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And then obviously Higgins, he's not happy to be on the tag, but he's out there practicing. So I was getting kind of bad vibes about that. And then I was concerned about the wrist. I'm less concerned about the wrist now on Joe Burrow now that I've seen – this is not even a story anymore about, recovery from that. So and another reason I think I put Burrow ahead of Love is because I think that I spent most of the offseason last year telling people that I thought Jordan Love was going to be pretty good. I didn't think he was going to be as good as he was at the end of the season. And to that point, I still think Green Bay was punching above its weight that last month and a half of the season. And I think because, recency bias is something that plagues us as fantasy football players, I think we remember that's the freshest thing in our memory. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see Green Bay start the season not at the level they started last season at, where people were talking about, oh my God, they got to get rid of him. But I could see them being a little sluggish to start off. And I don't necessarily think that's as likely in Cincinnati. Could happen in Cincinnati. So I go Murray, I go Burrow, I go Love, and then Prescott's a close third of that final 3. Not because I don't think he can get it done. I think he's a really good fantasy quarterback. The whole situation there with Jones and Lamb and Prescott, I just try to think about what that's going to be like to be in that locker room and to play out the season with that. And I don't know if CeeDee Lamb is going to be more at risk to soft tissue injuries since he's missed all this training camp time too. So I get some bad vibes there as well. So I'm going to go. So ADP is Murray, to answer your question, Kevin. ADP is Murray, Love, Burrow, Prescott. Brian is saying Love, Murray, Burrow, Prescott, right?
Yeah.
And then I have it Murray, Burrow, Love, Prescott. So the basic gist of this is everybody hates Prescott in this scenario. That's what we figured out for this. And Permar99 loves Joe Burrow out of that 4. He says he's the man easily there. So that's good that Permar is a believer in Joe Burrow this year for your Bengals. Let's stay in the state of Ohio here and talk about the Cleveland Browns. I didn't want to have to do it, and thank God it didn't come to it. But I almost had to buy Deshaun Watson as my backup quarterback in tonight or this afternoon's auction. I don't. He's a guy I guess I'd be okay with as my backup, but I wouldn't feel great about it. Should I though? I mean, Amari Cooper, they get Jerry Jeudy, and Njoku looked really good last year. Don't forget about Elijah Moore. A couple of talented pass catchers coming out of the backfield that are healthy right now, and Deontay Foreman and Jerome Ford. Am I a little bit too bearish on Deshaun Watson? Should I actually like him a little bit more than just I'm okay with him kind of as my backup, Brian?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I look at the guys where he's in the range where he's going, and I think if you look at upside wise where he's getting drafted, he's probably got the most of the guys where he's going. I actually have taken him a lot as my backup quarterback. I think he pairs up really nice with like a Prescott or a Burrow, a guy that's the safe guy that might not have quite as much rushing upside as some of those other players. And it's a little bit of a risk because I think it's kind of do or die this year for him. But I think it's one of those things, if he flops where you're drafting him right now, you can just get rid of him and pick somebody else up. And it's a low risk move with a lot of upside there. And then you can always pick up, one of those guys that's usually even you might see like an Aaron Rodgers or a Kirk Cousins or somebody like that on waivers at some point,
right.
Where you can pick up. So yeah, I'm drafting him just for the pure upside as a backup. I might not pair him with, say, like a Jaden Daniels, like a more upside-oriented starter. I might look at like that and say, all right, maybe let me pair him with like a Kirk Cousins or something like that.
Okay.
But, yeah, I think Deshaun's a good guy. If you're just shooting for the moon and just saying, hey, what guy back here can finish in the top 5 if everything goes right, I think it's him because of the way they're looking to run that offense. They want to throw the ball this year. They built the team to throw the ball. They have a good O-line. They should be a pretty good team this year. And I think if everything comes together, I don't know if we'll ever see the Deshaun Watson of, 3 or 4 years ago, but right. I think there's still the upside there. But this will probably be the last chance. If we don't see it this year, it's probably never coming back. So
the other thing, and I didn't consider this till now, but Cleveland's got a really good defense too. And I think their offensive line, I think you were right the first time you said it. I think their offensive line is great. And I think about their defense and how good that unit could be this year. That could actually hurt Watson, right? If they're playing good defense, maybe Ford and Foreman stand out, and that could take the pressure off Watson, and he could be more efficient then, and maybe it's better for him. And now we're in the time as a flat circle, and we're in a constant loop of trying to figure out, what's best for Watson this year. But you're right. I think I feel a little bit better about Watson now that you bring this up. Permar is just going off in the chat about Jordan Mason right now. He did get the start tonight. Now, Elijah Mitchell just came back from injury this week, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. But Jordan Mason targeted once. He did not catch it. I don't know if it was a bad pass or not, but 5 carries, 30 yards, and a touchdown already on the night for Jordan Mason. That touchdown, I'm trying to see, it was a 4-yard run. So there you go. Right. Mason is looking good tonight. A couple of emails here for you, Brian. Sure. Let's get into it. Brandy in Boston will lead things off. Hi, Brian. How concerned are you about Ray Davis taking away catches and touchdowns from James Cook this season? Thanks so much. That is Randy in Boston. Thanks for the email, Randy. I don't know. Have you been drafting a lot of James Cook this year? How do you feel about that Bills running back situation?
Yeah, I like Cook. He's going most of the time, like 4th round. I even got him in one FFPC in the 5th round after I started 4 wide receivers. So I'll take that all day. Yep. I think Davis will definitely have a role. Sounds like he's looked good. He's a good player, but I don't know if, James Cook was really, really good last year. And speaking of another Georgia guy that I watched, back from when he was a freshman at Georgia, he's a really good player. And, the biggest threat for me is just Josh Allen Josh Allen taking all those rushing touchdowns. Is he going to be a guy that gets 10 rushing touchdowns? Probably not. But, looking with Stephon Diggs being gone, they kind of have like a wide receiver committee situation going there. I think they're going to run a lot of the 2 tight end sets to get Kincaid and Knox in the field. And I think things are setting up for Cook to have a really good year.
So Ray Davis is more just like an injury away type guy. You don't really see him having a big role in this backfield, right? I
mean, you look at what they tried to do with like Latavius Murray and those other, was it Ty Johnson, I think. I mean, I think they want that second guy that can, come in and take, 35, 40% of the snaps is what I would guess. But yeah, you look at what Brady did, Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator, did last year. And you've talked about, recency bias, but towards the second half of the year, once Dorsey was fired and Brady took over, Cook kind of took off. And again, the only real knock on him I see is the rushing touchdowns, but you can get him in the 4th or 5th round. So that's kind of already worked into his price. So I think he's a great guy to target after if you start wide receiver heavy. He's a perfect guy to target in the 4th or 5th round.
And to your point, if he's your number one running back after going 4 straight receivers, I think you're doing it the right way. I mean,
I really like that in the draft. I started that way. Yeah.
And you know, Josh, what's your feeling on Josh Allen? I get this vibe that he's not going to be as running as much as he used to, and I don't think that Buffalo is going to expose him to stuff around the goal line as much as they used to, which I think could be working in James Cook's favor.
It certainly could. Even if you took, what did Allen have, like 12 rushing touchdowns or something crazy last year?
Yeah, it was high. It was high.
Even if you gave Cook, 2 or 3 of those, that helps a little bit. I don't know. I mean, Allen seems like the type of guy that when he wants to run it, he's going to run it. I know they probably want to try to keep him healthy for the playoff games against, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Baltimore, but he seems like the type of guy that's just he's going to sometimes just do his own thing a little bit. So, but it doesn't really scare me off too much on Cook. No, I think he's going to have a really good year.
One more email here that we'll get to. Russ in Tulsa. Do you prefer Austin Eckler or Brian Robinson in the Commanders' backfield this year? Eckler or Robinson? Russ, thank you for the email out of Tulsa. Do you have a feeling on this? And it's always I always ask these questions, right, to try to be, get you to go one way or the other. But if you want to say like, yeah, I don't have a feeling, I'm kind of splitting it down the middle, that's fine too. How have you been treating the Commanders rushers?
No, I won't take the easy way out on this one. I'm on the Robinson side of this one for sure. I think Eckler could be brought in to have a role coming out of third down in the passing game. Not sure how much he has left in the tank. I mean, he's getting up there. He's had a lot of touches in San Diego. He's not a big guy. San Diego, I guess not Los Angeles. He's not a big dude. And I think Robinson's underrated. I think he's a really good runner. If with Daniels coming in this year, if the offense kind of can take another step and put up some more points, move the ball, I think Robinson's going to benefit from that. And he's definitely the guy I'm targeting in that backfield.
Do you think that Eckler is done? I mean, because there's a prevailing thought out there, and I shouldn't say the prevailing, but there is a thought out there that what we saw from Eckler last year was kind of a precursor of what we're going to see of this year. I myself am not a subscriber to that. I think he's going to have a nice bounce back year, not to the level of him being having first round value. But do you think he's kind of washed? And since Farrell's not on the show tonight, I can use that term. Do you think Austin Eckler is washed?
As a feature back, yeah. I mean, he might have, like I said, if you want to get him the ball to the backfield, let him make plays in space, I think he can still do that for you. But yeah, I'm probably not as bullish as you are on him. And it could burn me. I could be wrong. But this is one where I felt like, all right, they're going pretty close enough, I think, in the draft where you kind of have to pick one. It's not like you can get Robinson and then take Eckler like 5 rounds later. So
right.
I've been in on Robinson. Robinson's my bet for this team this year. Yeah.
And the thing is too, with I wouldn't even think you'd want both those guys, right?
Yeah, exactly.
On your team. I mean, unless you're playing in like a closed 12-team league, then maybe it makes more sense. But when you're trying to win $1 million in the main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship, I think that's where you want to diversify a little bit. I'm telling you, man, I think this weekend, I think I have 9 drafts or 7 drafts and 2 auctions. I bet I get a Commander in every one. I'm really high on that offense this year with Jaden Daniels there and Kingsbury. And Permar talks my ear off, or not my ear off, but he's always talking about how excited he is with the Commanders this year too. And then they get rid of Dotson, which we haven't got into yet. We'll get into that in a second. But they get rid of Dotson, and then it opens up the door for Zacchaeus and De'Ami Brown, who you say, well, Balky, who cares? Well, they're going to be meaningful because Jaden Daniels makes them meaningful. That Commanders offense I'm pretty high on, Brian. Are you?
Yes, I agree. I'm a big Jaden Daniels fan. We talked about that range of quarterbacks earlier, those 4 guys. I haven't really drafted much in that range. I'm either like, the big 3, or I'm waiting on like a Jaden Daniels, trying to target him, even maybe a Caleb Williams if I wait too long to get like one of the top guys. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Daniels. He looks like he's a really good player. He was great at LSU last year. He was awesome. And I've always been a McLaurin fan. I think he's underrated, and he's just had nothing, at quarterback really to play with most of his career. I'm not a huge Kingsbury guy. I mean, I don't think it's big, but compared to last year, I mean, pretty much anything is an upgrade over what kind of happened last year. Right. So, and it sounds like Dotson was just kind of in the doghouse and they shipped him out, and they have kind of maybe one of those guys will emerge, at the number 2 receiver, but they might have a bit of a mix of a rotation there after McLaurin. So, but I am a fan of the offense overall as well.
Yeah, and to say I'm putting my money where my mouth is, I did buy both McLaurin and Eckler in that auction tonight, so I already got 2 Commanders on my team. And I'm probably going to talk more about that auction team. I'm almost sick of talking about it, but I'm going to keep bringing it up. A final question here for you before we get into the news. Someone that you've been trying to get on all your teams this year because you're that big of a believer in them, and then a player that you don't think is going to end up on any of your teams, Brian.
There's a couple guys I could name in the first one. I would say one that, like I mentioned earlier, that probably is going to determine how a lot of my season goes is Pacheco. Like in the 3rd round, I've really liked him after like a wide receiver start. I think the Chiefs offense is going to bounce back. I mean, they were kind of down last year because of the issues at receiver. I think they fixed that with, Worthy and then Marquise Brown when he's back healthy. And then obviously it seems like Rashee Rice might avoid a suspension this year, which will be great for the offense. And it sounds like they're ready to give Pacheco a 3-down role. And we talked about the backups earlier. There's no real threat. You've got Edwards-Helaire, who's a disappointment, and then 2 undrafted guys from the last 2 years. So I think they're going to give him all they can handle. So he's a guy I have a hard time passing on him in the 3rd round if he ever makes it there. I've even taken him late 2nd in drafts too as well. So I'm very bullish on him. For a guy I'm avoiding, it pains me to say because I like him, I think he's a good player, is George Pickens. I just haven't taken him yet. The Arthur Smith thing scares me. I just don't like the slow-paced offense. Tomlin's really conservative. They're going to run the ball a ton there. I think he's going to get a lot of targets, and he'll have his big weeks, but I think you're going to I could be wrong, and that could burn me on if he gets 150 targets. And Aiyuk doesn't end up going there, which it seems like he may stay in San Francisco. But there's just other players in that range where I'm targeting that I feel like, I just feel better about, the way I build my teams. And for some reason, Pickens, I just haven't fit him in yet. And he's not really a guy I'm targeting this year, unfortunately.
Let's go to Permar99 chiming in. And this is something that I think is worth bringing up. He wants to know if the rumors are true that Audric Estime is going to be the starter in Denver and the Broncos are going to trade Javonte Williams to Dallas. I've played fantasy football and followed the NFL long enough to say, to not say, well, there's no way that could happen.
Yeah.
Because crazy stuff like that does happen. And I mean, it would surprise me if that happens. It wouldn't shock me if that happens. But my approach this weekend, I'm approaching it as if Javonte Williams and Audric Estime are going to be in the same backfield as Jaleel McLaughlin in Denver, and I'm treating Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott as the running backs to draft in Dallas. That's how I'm doing it. Now, that, again, to borrow a phrase from you, it could burn me, but I think that's the way I think you have to approach it, Brian.
Yeah, I agree. I think Javonte, it sounds like he maybe had some weight issues like in minicamp or something, and he's turned that around. It sounds like he's going to be the guy there. So I'm in on him. And then you've got Estime and McLaughlin there. I think they'll be in that backfield's going to put up points, and I think Javonte is the number 1 guy there. From what I've heard, P. Ryan might be the odd man out there. Mm-hmm. And I've heard, some rumors of him going back to Cincinnati, which could put a damper on Chase Brown. Because they don't really have a lot behind him and Zach Moss there. So it's my guess is P. Ryan's the odd man out there. I heard the other day Miles Sanders to Dallas. I heard that one.
Ooh,
if he gets cut, I could see. I'd be shocked if Dallas doesn't add a running back. I mean, I think Zeke is cooked. I mean, in my opinion, he's cooked. Mm-hmm. I have not drafted him yet. I've heard some people like Dowdle. I have not done it yet. I've kind of avoided that backfield because I do think they will add a back there. Because you see these trades that happen. Somebody they'll throw a 7th round pick at somebody because somebody's going to get cut and they can add a body. Khalil Herbert, Miles Sanders, all these guys. I think somebody like that will end up in Dallas. But like you said, you just don't know. This is kind of the all these crazy rumors this time of year. You'll see the kind of the running back musical chairs once guys start getting cut. So.
For anybody who's been following along and drinking every time I bring up a player or we bring up a player that I bought in the auction this afternoon, take another one because I got Ezekiel Elliott in that auction as well. It's just crazy how this has worked out. Okay. The chat room is just a buzz with this Dotson trade. And the follow-up from this. So let's get into that. The Eagles ended up getting Jahan Dotson in a 5th-round pick yesterday from the Commanders in exchange for draft picks, specifically a 2025 third, 2 7th-round picks. And this is a guy who apparently in Dotson was playing behind De'Ami Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus, and now he's out. Now he's in Philadelphia, probably being the number 3 receiver there, because Philadelphia was struggling to find a guy who could be the number 3 guy there. They tried Paris Campbell. Johnny Wilson was a draft pick for him this year. So now he becomes probably the number 3 receiver there. Let's just go into the chat and we'll talk about, we'll get it right from the horse's mouth. Scott Hoyt, who says, does the trade of Dotson impact the running game? I think teams will focus on McLaurin opening the running game a bit. Do you think that's a valid point here, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I could see that happening. I think McLaurin was already the alpha there and was going to be the target monster in that offense. And Dotson had a pretty good rookie year. It's kind of surprising to see him, kind of fall out of favor like this. But it was a prior regime that drafted him. And yeah, I think they have enough with the other guys you mentioned. Plus, I honestly like Luke McCaffrey. I've heard some good things about him, where he can have a role at some point this year. They were using him out of the backfield some, so they might have some things, some packages for him as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm bullish on the running game with Brian Robinson there, so it certainly could help. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Dominic Gazzetti kind of chiming in at the same point. There's something to be said about abandoned wide receiver targets with some of them going to the running back. Now, I think some of them will go to Eckler, but maybe Brian Robinson gets a boost in pass catching here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a pretty good receiver. I remember I watched a lot of him at Bama because he played. I watched a lot of SEC football, and he was a good player. Mm-hmm. He was kind of always the unsung hero there. He wasn't like some of a freakish talent like some of those other backs that he was there with, like Najee Harris and some of those other guys that were bigger names. Mm-hmm. But he was always a really good player there, and I remember him being a good receiver as well. So I think he can absolutely do it. So, look at what James Conner did with Cliff Kingsbury back in Arizona. He could certainly, if he wants to feed Robinson, I think he can absolutely do it. So that's one of the reasons why I am high on him this year. So,
the other thing, and Permar brings this up too, and I did hear this as well. What happens if Devonta Smith is in the slot, Jahan Dotson is on the outside? Then don't we have to be moving Devonta Smith up our draft boards if he's playing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it seems like with Kellen Moore, they're going to do a lot more of moving Brown and Smith around. So I think that's a positive for both of them. Yeah, I'm very bullish on those guys as well. I think they're in for a bounce back year. There's definitely opportunity there with Dotson too. I mean, they have a pretty concentrated passing game with the 2 top guys and Goddard. And I think Dotson's a pretty good player, which is, again, I think he could step in if something were to happen to one of those guys. And if he does get more reps, if he starts playing outside and gets in the rotation, I think he's definitely a guy that I like him better, probably honestly, in Philly now than I would have in staying in Washington at this point.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I didn't realize that he had fallen behind not one but 2 of those guys. Yeah. So this might just be one of those things that we often hear it in baseball. Just change of scenery, and maybe that helps Dotson for sure.
Yeah, but I love Smith this year. I think he's going to have a really good year.
I do too. I think I was kind of on Smith before this, and now it's like, okay, this is a guy I really need to take a hard look at in my drafts going forward early on. Let's go to Carolina. Head coach Dave Canales said he wants Bryce Young and the starters to get some work tomorrow against the Buffalo Bills, and it sounds like in the final game before the regular season, we could see a lot of Bryce Young. And I think we want to see a lot of Bryce Young because the offense that he is in this year is radically different than the one that he was in last year, considering that he's got a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator, and he's got Jonathan Brooks, and he's got Xavier Legette, and he's got Deontay Johnson, and he's got Jatavian Sanders. He's got and a better offensive line too. So I think Carolina really learned their lesson last year. You can't just draft the number 1 pick, not surround him with anything, and expect him to do well. It's a lesson that I think that Chicago knew because all they did was surround Caleb Williams with talent this coming year. So we want to see Bryce Young. We want to see the Panthers improve. I'm very curious to see how some of these younger guys do. I know Jonathan Mingo had made a couple of headlines this summer as well. I know the corpse of Adam Thielen is still getting it done there. Anybody in Carolina you're excited about this year? Hopefully in a much better season for 2024 than 2023.
Yeah, I don't think it can get much worse than last year, obviously. It was pretty bad. It was kind of like New England. It's just horrible. I haven't drafted a Panther yet. I haven't. I can't make myself do it. I think Deontay Johnson's a good player. Again, I'm a pretty aggressive drafter. I tend to avoid bad offenses or offenses I think look bad. I know Canales has done wonders with Geno and then Baker. So again, maybe I'm selling them short, and I just don't see them being anything more than like still a bottom 10 offense with that talent. Maybe Brooks comes back and gives them some juice in the second half of the year, but for me, no, I haven't really gotten excited yet. So I can't really say I'm drafting Panthers this year.
Yeah, I mean, I would look. Brooks is an interesting guy because I could see the talent there. My concern is I don't get to use him as a starter until like week 6, and then I could see a season of, hey, he's healthy, he looks good, and yet the results aren't there after that torn ACL, and then he's a much better player for 2025. That's my concern with him. Deontay Johnson, I'm still taking. I'm going to take advantage of. Although the bidding was fast and furious on him this afternoon, so I don't know if I'm going to be getting him in any drafts. If everybody feels the same way I do about him. Other than that, I'm kind of, as far as redraft goes, no on Mingo, no on Leggett, no on Sanders. It's just no on Thielen. I think that it's either Brooks or Johnson for me, and I don't know if I'm going to get them based on how everybody was aggressively bidding this afternoon.
Yeah, with Brooks, I mean, I know that Rashad White had a really good year with Canales last year, so I could see that second half of the year. But to your point, like you wait the whole year, and then it's like, I think he's like an 8th round pick in FFPC right now, if I'm correct. So there's a lot of other guys I like. That's like you're taking him over like a Brian Robinson or something like that. Right. I'm not going to do that at this point. Yeah, maybe it burns me, like I said, but not haven't invested too heavily in Carolina.
And I'll say this, and Permar's right. I mean, Brooks could be a league winner. I mean, I've heard that from numerous fantasy analysts that it could happen. It's not like I'm going to avoid him totally. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get him at a spot where I'm comfortable. I'll pay sticker in the 8th round for him. But if he goes much higher than that, I don't want roster cloggers on my team to start off the season. I don't like that. My guys, I know players are going to get hurt. Like I don't want to draft guys that are already hurt or already rehabbing coming in. Bills head coach Sean McDermott said Curtis Samuel could actually play week 1 against Arizona. Said there's a chance that Marquez Valdez-Scantling could be healthy in time for week 1. But both situations are murky right now. Turf toe scares me. Turf toe is not something that all of a sudden you rested for a couple weeks and you're good to go. Maybe Samuel is recovered and he plays week 1 and we don't hear about this again, but I'm very skeptical about that. So to that point, how concerned are you with Curtis Samuel's turf toe right now? And if it is significant, who do you like better, Keon Coleman or Khalil Shakir?
I actually did hear that it's possible Samuel might have not had a turf toe, or it might have been something else. But it sounds like there's more positivity around him. He's a good player. A solid player. I drafted him, not like aggressively targeting him. I would like to I have not really gotten much Shakir yet, and I think I do want to get more of him. And I think same with Coleman. I think it's going to be tough early in the season to really figure out. Again, I think it's going to be Kincaid. Honestly, is going to be the number 1 receiver there. I could definitely see, Keon Coleman. He reminds me kind of like a Rashee Rice, like that big, slot red zone receiver that maybe isn't an outside guy, but if they put him in that kind of role, he could, score some touchdowns and have like a little bit of a kind of an emergence middle to the end of the year. Because I don't think Samuel or Shakir are alpha receivers. So, but. Yeah, to your question, I probably would go Shakir right now over Coleman, but I think it's going to be good offense. So I want to get some of all those guys to just increase my chances of hitting on, if somebody emerges as a 1 there, next to Kincaid.
Yeah, because they're not expensive. I mean, you can invest in those guys and they won't kill your draft. And oh, by the way, take a drink. I got Keon Coleman in the auction tonight as well.
He's got a lot of talent. He's a pretty good player last year at FSU. So.
Sean Payton has named Bo Nix the starting quarterback for Denver. Zach Stevens had this report. Bo Nix has looked really good. 23 of 30, 205 yards and 2 touchdowns in 2 preseason games. He's looked good under pressure. Granted, he's seen a couple of vanilla defenses, one that included a lot of backups in Green Bay. But you can't really, he can't control who he's going against, right? He can only go out and execute, which is what he did. Does this give you a little bit more faith in players like Cortland Sutton, Troy Franklin, Dulcich, we talked about the backfield as well. Are you bullish on, and Tim Patrick for that matter, are you bullish on the Broncos now that Nix looks capable, and we know Nix is the starter, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Given some of the quarterback issues there, it's funny because, again, I'm a Georgia fan, so I watched him play for 4 years at Auburn, and he was horrible against Georgia every single year. Then he transferred to Oregon, and then we played Oregon the first game after our first national title, and I think it was like 45-0 for pretty much the whole. We absolutely destroyed Oregon. He looked terrible, so I was not a fan of his. And then, as he went to the kind of the draft process and got drafted with Peyton, you heard like the Drew Brees comparisons, like that kind of that point guard, distributor quarterback, and it seems like he's got so many starts under his belt, and he's looked good. I think I do. Yeah, I think he's going to stabilize that offense, and it makes me feel a lot better about taking a guy like Sutton a little later, because he's not a guy you have to spend a high pick on. And he did have a good year a couple years ago. It's been a while, but if he can stay on the field, there's really I don't know if we're going to see much from Franklin this year. You hear a lot about Marvin Mims. He's been kind of a fantasy darling, but never really has made a huge impact. Maybe Peyton doesn't really like him that much. I'm not sure. Yeah. I actually did take Dulcich for the first time in a league as a number 2 tight end recently. So yeah, I do. I think it's going to be a boon for the whole offense.
I think that now is the time, because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to get to the hype guy to bring everybody into the background of the hype guy. Dave Gerzak came up with this. Dave Gerzak, my former HSFF co-host, who you drafted next to in Cincinnati at the KFFSC last weekend, Brian, said, it always seems like every year when we get to Vegas and we see these FFPC drafts, there's always one guy that jumps way up. There's always a guy that we used to call it the ascendant. But now the ascendant was a guy that was moving up multiple rounds. You just don't see that anymore, right? So we modified this declaration to the hype guy, the guy who's going to get a lot of hype. Not necessarily going to move up 3 rounds, but a guy that's going to be hyped up to the point where we will see some significant ADP movement. I've narrowed it down to 5 players, and we'll talk about them, each of them here. We talked a little bit about Brooks already, okay? And we listed the reasons why he could be a potential league winner and why we could see him hyped up, especially if we hear positive injury news about him heading into. Scott Hoyt asked me, have we heard the timeline on? I thought I heard week 3 or 4, but I could be wrong on that. I'm just assuming, like, I probably won't be able to start him right away if I draft him. However, if he's looking good and the Panthers are saying he's coming along, then we could see a player like him really move up, which is why he's on the list. We haven't talked about Brock Bowers, Brian. Brock Bowers is a tight end who's a rookie. And this may be, I've heard so many analysts say this could be the cheapest that you ever get him this year, because he's going to move up next year. Brock Bowers, what do you think of his potential? And I know he's hurt right now, but if he gets back on the field, we could see this guy move up too.
Yeah, another Georgia guy. So, I'm a fan. He was a generational tight end talent. I agree. He'll probably be the cheapest he'll ever go. The main things for him is like that. It was probably the worst landing spot for fantasy for him as a rookie to go to the Raiders. I had heard that the Rams were trying to trade up for him, and that would have been amazing. But and then he picks up the foot injury. So I'm a little worried. To be honest with you. There's so many other guys. Like I would take Pitts over him right now.
Uh-huh.
I don't know exactly where an ADP is going. I think they're kind of similar in ADP.
He's a little bit lower than Pitts right now. Yeah,
I haven't drafted him yet, to be honest. I love the player. I just don't know if it's going to be this year. I'm a little concerned now, especially now with the foot injury. Yeah. I was just at the point where I was like, I need to get more. I need to get some exposure to him. And now he got hurt at Georgia with that foot injury, and about something again, maybe costing him some time in his rookie year.
You saw him at Georgia. Is he the next guy? Like, is he going to be right up in the Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride level? Like, he's as good or better than those guys? Yeah,
he'll be in that. I have no doubt he'll be in that tier.
Okay,
no doubt in my mind.
We talked about Cooper Kupp a little bit. I want to move past him. We know that he could get hyped up, but again, this guy has already moved into the second round. It's tough to hype him up even further than that, especially at the presence of Puka Nacua. Per it's like he was looking at my list here. Malik Neighbors is the next guy in this list. We've already seen him move up, and I just think the sky's the limit for him. With as exciting of a player as he is, as talented as he is, his big playability, the fact that he's going to get all these targets. I know he's moved up a lot, but Brian, I could see him moving up even more.
Yeah, two of my first slow drafts I did, I got the 9 pick back to back, and I got him in the 4th round both times, and I was like an auto pick. I'll still draft him in the 3rd. I think the only risk is the Giants' offense imploding and Daniel Jones imploding. That's really it. There's no target competition. He's going to be the alpha there right away, and like you said, you could see 150 targets. Sky's the limit. He could absolutely be a league winner. Yeah, I'm aggressively drafting him. I'm not sure where his ADP is now, but I think he's maybe more in the mid to late 3rd now, if I remember from the last few drafts I've seen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm still targeting him. Yeah, he's that good. I agree with you.
What about and the other one too, Rashee Rice? Now this is interesting because Rice had been steadily moving up because no suspension. There should be a website. Has Rashee Rice been suspended.com, or you can just go to that website and it'll say either yes or no. He hasn't been suspended yet. And Permar99 brings this up in the YouTube chat that Zay Jones, a couple hours before we went on air tonight, got suspended for 5 games. I think it was domestic abuse.
It was,
yeah. And so now Rice wasn't domestic abuse, but I mean, it was equally reckless, Yeah. So now should we be getting more nervous about Rice potentially getting suspended this year? I am of the opinion where I'm still not there. I still don't think it happens, but yeah, I mean, I see something like this and I realize there still is a chance he could get suspended.
Yeah, I was laying off him a little bit earlier on, and then once the news broke that he might not get suspended, I did take him a few times. So I'm a little more cautious now, given that what just happened with Zay Jones. But to your point, that was domestic violence, and obviously what Rashee Rice did was stupid and idiotic, right. And he had 2 incidents over the offseason.
Right? Yeah, so it wasn't just one; it was 2 of them.
It's a matter of when, not if he gets suspended. It's just will he get suspended next year? So I think my answer would be right now at the right price. I don't know if I'd take him anymore in like the 4th, but if he fell to the 5th, I think it's worth a shot. I think the Chiefs are just going to have such a massive year offensively. I think Mahomes is going to have a huge year again. And if Rice is playing, he's going to benefit from it. So he's worth the risk, especially in the tournament format where you're trying to win $1 million.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely want some shots at him too. And if he gets suspended, he gets suspended. So
those are the 5 I came up with: Brooks, Bowers, Kupp, Neighbors, Rice. Is there anybody else when I described the criteria for the hype guy? Is there anybody else that I didn't list that you think should be on that list?
One guy I'll mention that I've started to warm up to, and it seems like he's going a little higher. It's in that 4th, 5th round range still. It's Kenneth Walker.
Oh, yeah.
We've heard a lot about him maybe getting a 3-down roll. Then he can catch the ball in the backfield. It sounds like the new coaching staff, Ryan Grubb coming in is like a more of a pro-style offense. They're not going to be the old school Pete Carroll offense anymore. It doesn't seem like. They're still going to run the ball a lot, obviously. But, they're going to spread it out with 3 wide receivers. So he should get to make some plays in space. And I think he's the guy clearly over Charbonnet, Charbonnet will play and have a role, but where he's going, I've been taking him in the 4th and 5th round a lot. I think he's a guy that could easily, next year you could see him in like the late 1st, early 2nd if he hits on like, his upside this year. So he's a guy I really like that I think's been moving up a little bit.
You're right. He has been moving up, but he is still low enough where he could still do some serious damage moving up. I'm glad you brought him up because he should be on this list. So we have to narrow it down here. I think Stacey Perez, when she co-hosted the show with me last year, I could be wrong on this. I thought we just did process of elimination. So out of these 6 guys, is there anybody that you want to eliminate right away? Brooks, Bowers, Kupp, Neighbors, Rice, Walker. Well, obviously not Walker because you just added him to the list. But any of those first 5: Brooks, Bowers, Kupp, Neighbors, Rice. It sounded like you're kind of out on Bowers, and I know that's weird coming from a Georgia fan, but it sounds like you're kind of out on him being the hype guy this year.
I would probably say if I had to pick one right first, I might go Brooks. I'm not buying the Panthers offense. I said, maybe at the end of the year, but you have to stash him for so long. And then, so I'll say Brooks. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to eliminate Brooks. We'll keep everybody else on the list. Is there anybody, because it's always tough. Is there anybody out of these 5 that maybe stands out that, more than the other 4 as a player who is going to be hyped up by these high stakes players drafting live in Las Vegas?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Cooper Kupp. I mean, I think the reports have been good about health. If he's healthy and he plays, most of the season, he can absolutely push for number 1 overall wide receiver in that offense. I think he started to decline a little bit, but I don't think he's a guy that he's not a speed guy. He's not a guy you're worried about, like, all of a sudden he's not fast anymore and he can't separate. He's such a good route runner. And again, I'm a big believer in McVay and that offense. I think it can put up just massive, massive stats. So I could see Kupp really getting pushed up even closer to where Puka is now.
Okay.
If the reports continue to be good.
Now, Scott Hoyt has a one-word response to the Kupp proclamation. Neighbors! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Three
He'd probably be the
exclamations.
second guy, on that list. He'd be number 2. Yeah.
So if you were to rank them, you'd go Kupp, Neighbors, Walker. Kupp, Neighbors, and Walker, I think, are the top 3 for you, and then there's a drop off, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. So Kupp, Neighbors, Walker. I'll open it up to the chat, the YouTube chat here too. I think we did this last year to see what other people said. Scott obviously likes Neighbors. Rashi Rice, Permar is a big fan of and sees.
I like him too. I like him a lot too.
God,
they're definitely my top 4 of those guys. Yeah, they're all pretty close.
It's so tough this year. I mean, typically we always pick a young guy, and almost always it's a rookie. So I just kind of assumed it was going to be Brooks, Bowers, or Neighbors. And then I think we've talked through it enough where we can see why Bowers and Brooks would not be as good of choices as these other 4. Kevin Williamson also chiming in with Malik Neighbors here too.
Yeah, I mean, I've drafted those 4 guys a good bit, and the 2 I cut off, Brooks and Bowers, I haven't taken yet. So it's how I'm drafting. So that's just how it's kind of fallen out. So
I think. And I'm going to go traditional on this before we name them. I just want to verify the ADPs of these guys. We already talked about Cooper Kupp going at the 212. And the thing is, if you're a believer in him, then, yeah, you could totally see why this guy would be the hype guy if he is going to contend to be the number 1 overall receiver this year. And if he does move all the way up from the 212 to, that 205, 204 area. Right now, that's where he's going. Neighbors, wide receiver 15, he's going at the 307. I'm telling you, Brian, not that I'm trying to sell you on this, but I could definitely see Neighbors climbing up a full round into the mid-second round. I know how crazy people get with stuff like this. He's door number 2. He's the mystery like that, and that's the other thing that works against Kupp is we kind of know what he can be, but we don't know how good Neighbors can be. Now, while I would agree with you that that Kupp probably should be the guy, I think the hype guy, everybody else is going to hype him up. I think it's going to be Neighbors this year.
No,
I think he's the guy that, again, rightly or wrongly, I think he's the guy that people are going to get super excited to draft and push him up. So I'm comfortable if you are naming Malik Neighbors the hype guy.
If everything goes, if Daniel Jones is just halfway decent and can stay healthy and get the ball to Neighbors, he could, he could be a guy you draft in the first round next year. I mean, he's that good.
Yeah.
So
Totally. And the fact that he's a giant and he's a top 10 pick, he gives me that Odell Beckham vibe too, a little bit, and they're both LSU guys too. I just realized that. Permar drafted Neighbors in the middle of the second. He loved it with Drake London, Brandon Aiyuk, Deontay Johnson, and Ridley. Nathan Klingensmith says Neighbors is going to go right behind Marvin Harrison Jr. by season start. I could see that happening as well. Harrison's going like right after Nakua at this point too. So
like Drake London up there, with those
Drake
guys.
London, yeah. Drake London could have been on this list too.
Yeah, I'm big on him this year too.
Yeah, I think that the second round gets a bad rap this year. I hear all these people all the time. I hate the second round. Every pick in the second round sucks. Like what? Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake London. What's wrong with that? Yeah. Like there's a lot to like in the second round.
Early to mid second, there's usually always a guy there I like. At some point. When you get to maybe the back half of the second, you got to start making some choices. But there's that run of receivers. I really like it.
I would say that drafting in the second round, as excited as I am to do that this year, I was as excited to chop it up with you for an hour, Brian Domville. So thank you so much for coming on the show in our KFFSC preview. I should have asked you, how did your KFFSC leagues go in Cincinnati? Were you happy with them?
Yeah, I was. I did a little more early wide receiver in those. Just kind of fell out that way. I did get Bijan Robinson in one of the leagues and Tyreek Hill in the other. I ended up at the front end of the drafts. But yeah, I liked it. I feel like I did okay. Those are tough drafts, man. The live ones with Ket, there's a lot of good drafters in there. So yeah, I'm hoping.
But iron sharpens iron, right?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it makes it better for the rest of the year. I'm hoping I can I finished 5th overall in Kentucky a handful of years back. So I want to one day. That's my goal, is to take the big trophy that Ferrell always has there. I want to take that, and then I'll definitely come to Louisville if I ever.
Right? Yeah, totally. I was talking about this with a couple. Well, no, last week when we had Randy Lavender on, who won the KFFSC main event last year. He said, yeah, going into the championship round, I was like 70th, and I'm like, well, you know who was first going into the championship round? It was myself and Jim Cole, who shared a team, and we were first, and then we put up like a 115 in the first round. We're like, well, that dream's over. But yeah, it would be fun to win the KFFSC. It'd be fun to win the Fantasy Pros Championship, FFPC main event, shooting for $1 million there as well. You never know. You could be cashing the big check there as well, Brian. We'll continue to follow you on the X, Brian_Domville. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I learned a lot. Very entertaining, my friend. And hopefully we'll get to see you live and draft against each other in Louisville someday, or maybe online sometime with the KFFSC onlines as well.
All right. Thanks, Balky. This was awesome. A lot of fun.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. That is Brian Domville, the 9-time FFPC and maybe soon Fantasy Pros champion, joining me on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour tonight. I want to thank him for popping on. I want to thank the FFPC, the KFFSC, and all of you for streaming, downloading, watching. Always fun. Now, bit of housekeeping here. The next 2 weeks, this show is off. We have the Fantasy Pros Draftathon going on the next weekend, so I'm off for that. And then obviously the following week, we're at the live events in Las Vegas. So we'll be back September 13th after being off for the next 2 weeks. However, I can tell you that I believe, and we kind of threw it together today, I think we're going to do a special show, probably some live draft coverage this coming Friday. I may or may not be on, but I think at a minimum, Aiden LaCorey and Dave Tripoli would be on. And I think we might have a special guest for that. And it's a guest that you might be surprised at if they're able to come on. And I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to overpromise. But I think we're still going to do something next Friday night. In case you missed last night's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, rewatch it on the FFPC or the BSN socials. 4 for 4's Connor Allen joined me for 2 hours. It was a lot of fun. Next Thursday, Matt Schauf and another special guest will come on. Matt Schauf from Draft Sharks will join me, and I'll have another co-host on that show as well as we go hard leading up until, every day now is going to be the biggest drafting day of the season until the season starts. 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship drafts are live. Sign up for the midnight 12:30 or 1 a.m. Drafts tonight. FFPC main event and Fantasy Pros will start bright and early tomorrow. Sign up for those 6-hour slows. Because they are going to be taken off the lobby here pretty quick because we got to get those done before the start of the season. Don't forget the FFPC Superflex Best Ball Tournament. Grand prize was doubled to $100,000 this year. Just $35 to enter that. Live and slow drafts going on there at myffpc.com. Check out the dynasties as well. Go to myffpc.com. Register for drafts this weekend. They are filling fast. You're not waiting around long. You're getting into drafts, less waiting, more drafting. It's what you want. It's what we're giving you at the FFPC. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends and enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be Tuesday night. We will have live draft coverage. No, I beg your pardon. Sunday night, we'll have live draft coverage, I believe. That's the plan right now. And then Tuesday as well. Thursday will be the Better Sports Network. And then Friday, again, probably more live draft coverage with an extra special guest to sort of kick off the draftathon going on then. We will be back. The show will be back, like I said, in 3 weeks from today, and we'll take you through the regular season. Until then, enjoy the rest of the drafting season. Thank you so much for being a part of the show and making it awesome. Your weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. It was broadcast live and was watched around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, more interviews, and more advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you again next week.
One thing I should remember to tell you is, and I mentioned this at the top of the show, all the live stuff is filled here at Caesars at the live events for KFFSC this weekend. However, they'll have main event drafts going on every single night up until the start of the season. Those resume on Monday after the KFFSC live events end. So make sure you're checking that out. Compete with me, compete with Brian, and all the other luminaries that some were hanging out in the chat tonight that I'm very excited to see this weekend, that I've already seen this weekend, caught up with a lot of friends this week. Can't wait to do that this weekend, and I can't wait to catch up with all of you in Las Vegas at Planet Hollywood in a couple of weeks as well. Enjoy your drafts, crush it, get out there and win that $1 million, and we'll talk to you again soon.